Christmas is a time of birth, a time of joy, a time of healing and hope. In the midst of this darkened world, the God of love broke through the shadows of sorrow and sin and sent his one and only Son to draw us up from the depths of our despair into the light of a new day. Christmas is a time when we see God as a little baby, a helpless child. In innocence and grace, the Son of the Almighty came to us to live as a man. He left behind the mansions of heaven for the warmth of a mother's womb. He entered into human flesh so that he could bind our wounds and give us comfort as a brother and friend, teacher and Lord. He became like us so that through his death we might become like him. Christmas is a time when that innocence is revealed once more, where the lost find their way, where the broken are made whole, where the sorrowing discover a world of hope beyond what their eyes can see. It is a time when that same spirit that lived and moved in the sweet Savior can come alive again through the words and deeds of those who are willing to see the baby for all he is. I invite you to still yourselves, to rest in contentment in God's sweet embrace as you listen to a story of a child who learned to see so much more in the little baby of Bethlehem. Come join him now to see the baby who became a man and gave his life for you. "Bam! I got you, you're dead!" a little boy shouted as a snowball hit Adam on the back of his coat. "No, you can't go past the tree, it doesn't count, Nicholas," Adam shouted. "Yes, it does," Nicholas shouted back. "It doesn't matter when you're in a snowball war. Besides, you've got Brandon on your side, so I get to go past the tree." Just then the door of the house next door swung open. From the doorway emerged Mrs. Miriam, Adam's neighbor and family friend. "You kids keep quiet out there," she shouted from her front porch. "You're making too much noise, and I'm trying to get some rest." Adam had never seen his next-door neighbor so upset before. He watched her as she stood in her old ratty bathrobe, her arms folded across her chest as she shivered in the cold December air. "Sorry, Mrs. Miriam," he said as he dropped a snowball to the ground. "We'll play more quietly." "Good," she snorted as she stared at the three young boys. Just see that you leave me in peace." With that, she quietly turned around and walked slowly into the house. "What's her problem?" Nicholas asked. "I don't know," Adam answered. "She's always been nice to us, but lately she doesn't want anyone around. Maybe she's sick or something." "Well, come on, let's take our sleds to the park," Brandon, Nicholas's younger brother, said. "I can't go to the park," Adam replied. "I have to work on my Sunday school project later." Nicholas rolled his eyes. "I don't want to go to the park. Who cares about that old lady? Let's just keep playing." "She's not a bad lady," Adam added. "Let's just leave her alone." "Yeah, come on, Nicholas. We don't have to make so much noise," Brandon said. Just forget it," Nicholas said. "I'm bored anyway. I'm going home. Come on, Brandon. We have to get going anyhow." He added sarcastically, "See you later, Adam." As the two brothers left, Adam stood there looking at Mrs. Miriam's house. He remembered how she had always had it decorated so beautifully every Christmas, with bright lights and festive greens. But this year it looked cold and dark, like something was missing. This wasn't like her at all. After a long, thoughtful moment, he turned and silently headed inside his house. Later that evening, as Adam was getting ready for bed, he asked his mother, "Mom, why is Mrs. Miriam so cranky lately? We used to be good friends with her, but now she's always yelling at me whenever I'm playing with my friends." "Here, brush your teeth," his mother told him as she handed him his toothbrush. "Mrs. Miriam's sad, Adam. A couple months ago, she lost her son in the war." "Mrs. Miriam's son died in the war?" Adam asked with astonishment. "I didn't know that. What happened to him? Did someone shoot him? Did he get blown up?" Just then, Adam's little 3-year-old sister Lena burst into the bathroom. "Mommy, Adam took my toothbrush," she squealed. She grabbed for it. "Give it back," she screamed. "Lena," Adam shouted with a mouthful of toothpaste. "Cut it out. This is my toothbrush. Mom!" "Come on, Lena Rose," Adam's mother said as she scooped up her daughter. "Leave your brother alone. Finish up, Adam, and Daddy will be in a few minutes to read to you and say prayers." Adam spit out the toothpaste and put his dirty clothes into the hamper. He walked into his room and sat down on the floor by his little display of army men. He looked at the green and gray armies facing each other through the plastic barbed wire, guns pointed and tanks and planes poised for attack. Then he noticed a separate pile of men on the side, the ones who had gotten killed in battle. He picked up one, a radio man with no gun, and thought about Mrs. Miriam's son. He got up with the little army figure and walked over to his bed to sit down. Just then, Adam's father walked into the room. "All ready for bed, bud?" he asked as he sat down next to his son. "Dad," Adam began, "why do people have to have wars?" "Well, that's a good question," his father answered. "I guess because we live in a fallen world. We're all separated from each other. Sometimes one country wants what another one has, or the people get mad over something, and they go to war about it." "Well, why doesn't God stop all the wars?" "Someday he will," his father answered. "But for now it happens. All we can do is be who he wants us to be and try to be peacemakers." Adam's father stroked his son's head and added, "Mommy said she told you about Mrs. Miriam's son. Does that make you sad?" "It makes me sad and angry," Adam said, his eyes beginning to tear up. "I wish I could go there and make those people stop the war." "I know, Adam," his father replied. "But you know what? We can't be like that. We can't act like the people who start the wars. We're supposed to help make peace wherever we go." He reached over on Adam's bookshelf and picked up his Christmas storybook. "That's what Christmas is all about. It's why Jesus came as a little baby, see? It's like your Sunday school project. Out of all the children at church, your teacher picked you to write about what Christmas means to you. She knows you write well and that you have a good and loving heart. She knows you'll show people the truth." Adam looked at the cover of the book at the little baby Jesus in the manger and put his head down for a moment. "I just don't like war. It's just so terrible that people have to kill each other." "Yes, it is," Adam's mother said as she peered her head in the doorway. "But we can remember all the good things Jesus has done for us, and that will help us to find peace about it." "Well, I just wish I could do something about Mrs. Miriam's son dying," Adam said as he wiped his eyes. "You can," his mother said. "You can pray for Mrs. Miriam, and maybe you can think of something nice to do for her, something to help her not be so sad." Adam thought for a moment. "Mom, can we bake cookies for Mrs. Miriam tomorrow?" he asked. "Then I can take them over to her and see if she needs help with anything." "Sure we can," his mother answered. "Maybe we could go and invite her over for Christmas dinner." Adam tightened his face and looked sad and serious. "Mom, Dad, can I just go over by myself?" he asked. "I just want to go by myself." After a moment, his father said, "Okay, if you want to, you can. Are you sure?" "Yeah, I'm sure," he answered as he crawled into bed. "Why don't we put your army man back with the others?" Adam's father said as he held out his hand. "No, I want to keep him here tonight," Adam replied as he carefully placed the figure between his pillow and his stuffed animals. Adam's father smiled and took out the Christmas story to read to his son. The next day, Adam arrived at Mrs. Miriam's door with a plate of cookies covered in pretty red cellophane wrap and a bright white ribbon. He took a deep breath and rang the bell. When there was no answer, he slowly raised his hand and rang it again. Finally, the door opened and Mrs. Miriam stood there, sleepy-eyed and tousled, her hair in a mess, and the wrinkles worn deep into the expression on her face. "What is it, Adam?" she said with a sigh. My mother and I baked these cookies for you, and I don't think I could eat them, but thank you," she managed to say. "Belina and I decorated them for you, and we made cards," Adam said as he bit his lip. Mrs. Miriam sighed again. "Okay, I'll take them," she said wearily. She took the plate of cookies in her hand. "Thank you," she muttered as she began to close the door. "Mrs. Miriam," Adam said suddenly. The old woman stopped and looked at him. I'm sorry that your son had to die in the war." Mrs. Miriam's eyes began to tear up. Those thoughtful words from this sweet young boy seemed to break the shell of her frozen heart. "Thank you," she said through her tears. She paused for a moment and added, "I'm sorry, too, that I yelled at you and your friends the other day. You're really nice boys." "Brandon's pretty nice, but sometimes Nicholas is a pain," Adam said. Mrs. Miriam chuckled a little. "Well, thank you again for the cookies." "Mrs. Miriam," Adam continued, "I was wondering, would you like me to help you decorate? I don't have to go anywhere else right now. My mom says I can stay and help you set up your tree." "I don't know, honey," she answered. "I just don't have the strength to put up the decorations this year." Adam was thoughtful for a moment. "You know, my Grammy died at Christmas time," he began. "I was just a baby then. My dad told me that he was so sad that he didn't want to put up any decorations either. But then he said he looked at me in the playpen and he knew he had to put up the tree." Mrs. Miriam swallowed as a tear fell from her eye. "Your daddy's a good man," she said. "But I don't have anyone else around, so I haven't felt strong enough to carry on." Adam looked into the sorrowing woman's eyes and smiled. "You have us, Mrs. Miriam. We'll help you get through it. Maybe if I help you decorate, you'll feel a little better." After the longest moment, Mrs. Miriam finally said, "Okay, Adam, you can help me decorate. I have to warn you, though, I have a lot of boxes to go through." "That's okay," Adam said with enthusiasm. "I can help you with them." "Okay, come on in then," Mrs. Miriam said as she opened the door all the way. The old woman and the little boy spent the next several hours rummaging through the boxes and putting the decorations on the old artificial tree in the corner of the parlor by the fireplace. Adam's simple joy seemed to revive the grieving mother's heart, and ever so slowly she found herself feeling the mood of the season. Toward the end of the decorating, she brought out some hot cocoa and the cookies for the two of them, and put them on the coffee table. She noticed Adam looking at a little homemade popsicle stick ornament with a picture of Mrs. Miriam's son glued to the front. "Do you want me to hang this one on the tree?" Adam asked. Mrs. Miriam's eyes began to glaze over. No, I'd like to do it," she said. She held the frail ornament tenderly in her hands and looked with love at the faded picture of the little boy. "This was the first ornament my son ever made for me," she said. "We always put it right in front here." She hung the ornament in a place of honor and stood back to look at it. Adam, meanwhile, began looking through an old photo album in one of the boxes. "Does this have pictures of your son too, Mrs. Miriam?" Mrs. Miriam turned around. "Oh, I haven't seen that album in years," she said. "Here, why don't you bring it over to the couch and we can look through it together? Come on and have some hot cocoa." Adam hoisted the bulky album out of the box and carried it over to the couch. Mrs. Miriam took it and opened it for the two of them as Adam sat close to her on the cushions. She gently turned the pages, revealing the images of the life that had ended much too soon for a mother's heart to bear. Adam saw all the happy photos of mother and child, and he looked up to see a tender smile creep up on Mrs. Miriam's face. "Here is one of my son when he was just 1 day old," Mrs. Miriam said as she pointed. "You know, he was born here, just outside this house when it used to be a bed and breakfast, right in the old servants' quarters out back. We didn't have time to get to the doctor that night, so Mrs. Mason delivered him. She was a midwife." "A what?" Adam asked innocently. "Like a special baby nurse," Mrs. Miriam said. "She was the housekeeper here, but used to deliver babies all the time. Joe and I were coming into town to visit Joe's relatives, and we got stuck in a terrible snowstorm. The place was full, so Mrs. Mason took us in for the night. I was so scared. I guess God was watching out for us that night. And when he was born, I forgot all about how scared I had been." She looked at the picture once more. "You were my little angel, my gift from heaven," she softly said. Adam watched the bittersweet tears that ran down Mrs. Miriam's cheeks, and he put his small arm around her shoulder as he moved closer. He didn't say a word, but sat with her for a long while. Finally, Mrs. Miriam wiped her tears with the sleeve of her bathrobe and said, "Oh my, here's one from when he decided to run away from home." She began to laugh. "I guess it wasn't very nice of me to take his picture, but he looked so sweet with his Boy Scout knapsack stuffed with his clothes and his bear, and 3 peanut butter sandwiches that I couldn't resist. His father and I followed him after he left, and you know where he ended up? Down at the Mission on Broad Street, talking with the people and handing out soup and blankets. I was so proud, I couldn't even get upset with him." "What's this one?" Adam asked, pointing to a picture of Mrs. Miriam's son behind a typewriter. "Oh, that's him right out of college," she replied. "That's when he got his first writer's job." She paused and smiled. "That boy of mine, he was always a man of words. He wrote such beautiful things, poems and stories, just like you do." She looked at Adam and smiled. "Why, your mother says you write just like a grown-up. She showed me one of your poems. It reminded me so much of my son. He could heal and he could stir up people with those words of his. It warmed my heart whenever I read them." Adam pondered the sweet mother's words in praise of her son. He looked down at another picture of Mrs. Miriam's son standing next to some soldiers and said, "Is this when he went to war?" "Yes," she said, pausing as her eyes welled up once more. He went to write about the war so people would know the truth about what was going on. You know, I don't know if he ever touched a gun. He wouldn't hurt anybody for anything. He was such a gentleman. How did he die? Adam asked, and then suddenly added, Oh, talking about that will make you sad, won't it? Mrs. Miriam smiled again at the young boy's thoughtfulness. It's okay, honey, she sighed as she wiped her nose and continued. My son was captured with a group of men by enemy soldiers and put in a prison camp for 5 days. One day the soldiers came to take one of the prisoners away. The man they chose had a family, so my son stepped forward and took his place. And then they killed him? Adam asked, his eyes wide with anguish. Yes, Adam, Mrs. Miriam said as the tears fell more freely. One of his closest friends who made it out of there wrote a letter telling me what had happened. I just fell apart, but I knew it was true because it was so like him. It was exactly what I would have expected him to do. Then Mrs. Miriam saw something behind the picture. It was a letter. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. This was the last thing he wrote, she said. It was only a few lines, but it meant the world to me. What did he write? Adam asked. Mrs. Miriam read the little note. Dear Mom, I am leaving now. I don't think I'll ever see you again until we meet in heaven. But when you get there, don't worry, because I'll be calling out your name. Adam sat silently for a few moments, not sure what to say. That makes me sad, was all that he could get past his lips. Really sad. Suddenly he looked at the clock above the mantelpiece. Oh, Mrs. Miriam, I have to go. I'll be late for dinner. He quickly stood up. I'm sorry. It's all right, honey, she replied. I can finish the rest later. She helped the young boy into his coat and turned him around to do the buttons. For a moment, Adam felt like he was standing in for her son, the way she looked into his eyes. Thank you, Adam, for coming over. I feel a little better now. You're welcome, he said. Maybe I can come over tomorrow and we can finish decorating. I'd like that, Mrs. Miriam said. Adam turned and walked out the door, but then paused and turned around. He ran back to Mrs. Miriam, who opened her arms to receive him as he hugged her tightly for the longest time. Then, with a smile, he turned and walked down the steps into the snow as he hollered, See you later, Mrs. Miriam! After dinner, Adam went into his room and spent the next 2 hours all alone. When his mother finally came up to check on him, Adam was sitting on his bed with a pad and pencil. It's about time for bed, sweetheart, his mother said. What have you been doing all this time? Finishing up my Sunday school project, he said. I was trying to get it done so I could show Mrs. Miriam before we go to Christmas Eve service. Well, you can finish it tomorrow, sweetie. It's getting late, his mother said. I'm all done, he said with a smile. I can't wait to show it to her tomorrow. Where are your little army men that Nicholas gave you for your birthday? Adam's mother asked as she looked toward the empty space on the floor where the display had been. Oh, I threw them out, Adam said as he yawned. I don't want them anymore. Adam's mother smiled and sat down on the bed and kissed her son. What's that for? Adam asked. Just because, his mother answered. Because you see things other people miss. Because you care about the hurts other people have to go through. And because you're my son. Oh, okay, Adam said. I'll get ready for bed now. And for the longest moment, mother and child held each other in a warm and tender embrace. The next day, a little before Adam was going to leave with his family for Christmas Eve service, he ran over to Mrs. Miriam's house and rang the doorbell several times. Mrs. Miriam answered the door, but this time she was wearing a dress, and she had put on makeup and done her hair. I've got something for you, Adam said, all out of breath. You do? Mrs. Miriam said with wide eyes. What is it? I wrote something for Sunday school, for our Christmas Eve service, Adam said. I wanted to read it to you before we left. Would you like to hear it? Mrs. Miriam smiled a sad smile. Yes, Adam, I would love to, she said. Come on inside where it's warm. The two went into the parlor and sat down on the couch once more as Adam unbuttoned his coat. He straightened up, took out his paper and cleared his throat as he prepared to read. Mrs. Miriam looked on with affection. It's a poem called See the Baby, he began. Then he read. See the baby lying there. Mama loves him so. Born this night beside an inn, had no place to go. See him smiling as he sleeps. Mama looks with love, knows he came to bring her joy, sent from God above. See the baby, now a boy, left his mama's side. See her watch him in a place where the lost reside. Watches as he teaches them with his gentle ways. Someday he will show them more in the coming days. See the boy, a grown-up now, man of words is he. Hear him teach and heal and stir with his words so free. Mama smiles and beams with pride, ponders in her heart where those words will take her son, what it all may start. See the man among his friends, leaving for his cause, gives his life to save them all, dies as angels pause. Mama grieves and lets him go, knows he gave his all, holds him closely in her heart, hears him gently call. See the grave where he was laid, such a quiet tomb. See the world he came to reach, now a second womb. See the one who gave him birth, waits for heaven's door, where she knows she'll see her son, calling her once more. Mrs. Miriam sat there in awe of what she had heard. Why, Adam, that was beautiful. You wrote that? Yes. Do you really like it? He said humbly. Oh, honey, it's the most beautiful poem about Jesus I ever heard, she said with moist eyes. But Mrs. Miriam, Adam interrupted, I know it sounds like Jesus, but I didn't just write it about him. You didn't? No, I wrote it about your son, Adam said. Yesterday when you told me all about the things he did, it made me realize something. Jesus just didn't come to be born. He came to teach and to heal and to die and to show us what God's like. That's what your son did too. He showed the world about God just like God's son did. That's because he was God's son too. Mrs. Miriam began to tremble, both with sorrow and with joy, as the words pierced through the veil of her own grief, and she saw her own departed son in the verses. She marveled at the tender compassion of this little boy, at the incredible insight with which he saw things, and at the way he had so beautifully put it all into words that spoke not only of her son, but of God's eternal Son as well. It was wonderful, Adam. Simply wonderful. I have something else for you, Adam said. If you don't want it, you don't have to keep it. I'm sure I'll love it, Adam, Mrs. Miriam replied. What is it? Adam reached into his pocket and removed the little man he had taken out of the pile of plastic soldiers. Wrapped around it was a piece of thin red ribbon, tied in a bow. I threw the rest of my army men away, Adam said. I don't think I want to play war anymore. But I took this one out because I was thinking of your son. I was really wishing I could have taken him away from the war. If it makes you sad, you don't have to keep it. Mrs. Miriam, the tears falling softly like the snow outside, wrapped her arms around the sweet young boy and held him close to her as she rocked back and forth on the old couch. No, honey, I love it, she said. Let's go put it on the tree right now. The two rose from the couch and walked over to the spot where the little popsicle stick ornament was hanging. Together, the woman and the child put the little man on a branch next to the picture of Mrs. Miriam's son and stood back to look at it. To Adam, it looked like the tree was finally complete. Thank you, Adam, for helping me to see my baby in a whole new light, Mrs. Miriam said with a sigh. You're welcome, Mrs. Miriam, Adam said. He stood there with a reflective look on his face and then finally said, Mrs. Miriam, would you like to come to church with us tonight? My mom said she wants you to come to Christmas dinner tomorrow, just like you used to. The sweet woman's eyes ran freely with tears, and she said, Yes, Adam, I'd love to come to church with you and share Christmas dinner with you. She walked over to the closet and took out her church coat and put it on. I'm sorry, she suddenly said. I didn't get you anything for Christmas this year. Well, Mom says I get too many presents anyway, Adam replied as the two began to laugh. But you did give me something. You helped me to see the baby Jesus in a whole new way. Mrs. Miriam knelt down and began to button Adam's coat, as once more she looked into those innocent eyes with love. As she stood up, Adam reached out his small hand and took the gentle woman's hand in his. And in silence, The two walked out into the cool evening air on a solemn Christmas Eve to meet with those who would come to see the baby that night.
Sleep, baby Jesus, close your weary eyes, hide yourself in faithful dreams before you live your life. Slip away to heaven and rest in gentle peace, never to awaken the Lord your soul to keep, 'cause your feet will walk on water, your eyes will pierce the dark, your heart will save the souls of men, your hands will bear the scars. Sleep, baby Jesus, for now your time has come to heal the wounded leper, to calm the raging storm with perfect steps of perfect grace. You leave behind your fear and walk along these dusty roads, though your fate is clear, 'cause your feet walk on water, your eyes pierce the dark, and your heart will save the souls of men, your hands will bear the scars. Sleep, baby Jesus, my Father and my child, beneath this broken cross of sin, stained with man's denial. And though you now are breathless, with thorns upon your head, body has been broken so your children can be fed, 'cause your feet have walked on water, your eyes have pierced the dark, and your heart has saved the souls of men, your hands now bear the scars. Your feet have walked on water, your eyes have pierced the dark, your heart has saved the souls of men.